When the announcement came that Trump was going to deliver a primetime speech, the big TV networks had a decision to make. Would they air it live, knowing that it was going to be about the 2020 election, which is Trump's number one favorite topic to lie about? Some networks decided not to. They presented themselves as caring about the truth. And then immediately afterward, they went right back to booking lawmakers and pundits live to say whatever they want and not be fact checked. Open mics for liars are so deeply embedded into what today's media does that the people running these organizations don't even think about it, or they hope that you won't think about it. And these news agencies spew lies of their own regularly. So, what they did with Trump's speech may have been a good thing in isolation, but in reality, it's drenched in hypocrisy. We won't carry this speech live because it probably contains falsehoods. Now, tune in for live falsehoods from our guests. One network did air part of it while openly emphasizing that Trump constantly says false things about the election. That's a media story, too. I'll explain ahead. The performative decision making about whether or not to air that one speech live, that was one major issue that came to a head. Here's another. Trump's allegations surrounded China and its alleged efforts to swing the 2020 election. There is no reason to trust what Trump says about 2020. And simultaneously, the media has failed to inform America about the very real influence campaigns that China is enacting in this country and all over the world. China is engaged in all kinds of trickery to try to swing American opinion, to prevent the world from learning what it's up to. Part of that has been a media strategy. Recently, a leader of the Uyghurs joined me here to talk about China's actual colonization, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, and how the media does China's bidding in misrepresenting and largely ignoring all that while fixating on what China wants the world to fixate on. Coming up, I'll share something else he said about the media that I didn't manage to squeeze into that episode. I'll break down for you how China has influenced major news outlets and spent large sums of money doing so. All of this speaks to how you are being mistreated. You are being left without what you need and deserve. We all are. Also, today, I'm tackling listeners' questions. One involves a very timely issue. 350,000 people in the country officially lose their legal status here this week. A listener explains she can't figure out what's true about it from the media. And a listener asks about an important story that has gotten virtually zero coverage, even though legal scholars in a new report call it the most aggressive movement of settler populations into occupied territory in current times. You would think the media would be all over that, right? Nope, because it does not fit their narrative. In fact, it turns the media's favorite victim narrative on its head. That sounds confusing, right? It won't when we get there, I promise. Plus, the New York Times is back with all the blood libel fit to print. It has yet again run a column from its favorite pseudo-intellectual propagandist, pushing the world's most incendiary lie, the craziness about genocide and Israel. And I have an update for you on the Department of Justice going after writers at the Times. These two stories together are a powerful reminder that simplistic victim narratives hide reality. Join me today in showing the media that they stand corrected. Hello and welcome. So great to have you here. My name is Josh Levs, and this is my podcast, They Stand Corrected, which fact checks the news. I spent 20 years in mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN. You can learn all about me at my website, joshlevs.com. But as I say all the time on the show, the truth has nothing to do with the person delivering it. It's not about me. Whether I'm alive or not, the earth is still round. This show is about what is definitively true. Speaking of that, along with this show comes a newsletter. You should absolutely get it. It's free. I don't expect you to take my word for anything. The newsletter has links for you, and that's a great way to get in touch with me also. If you have questions or you want to challenge something I said, I love hearing from people. While it is free, paid subscribers get extra content. For one thing, I take the time to edit, annotate, and write out transcripts of big chunks of this show. That's the kind of thing you cannot get anywhere else. At the top of the show, I often share notes from listeners, but today I'm saving that for later on because I'll be answering a couple of listeners' questions. I'm going to jump right into this. Trump's speech last week. ABC, NBC, and CNN did not carry it live. They pointed out that it would most likely contain misinformation. That decision would make sense if news agencies followed it in general. That is the kind of thing I have called for many times. But it should be the standard MO, not something that happens just once. Right afterward, and in the days since, and on the Sunday political talk shows, they all, of course, went right back to broadcasting people live who never get fact checked. So that is one big media issue. Here's another. I've told you in the past about the ridiculous freakouts going on about CBS. Under its new leadership, CBS brought in the founder of the Free Press to take over, Barry Weiss, and folks across big legacy media have been screaming the sky is falling, that CBS is allegedly turning into some MAGA, pro-Trump news agency. It factually is not. I've gone through this before, so no need to repeat it. If you haven't heard those episodes, I encourage you to go back and listen to every episode since the beginning. CBS did air part of Trump's speech, and here is what they said in setting it up.
Much of what the president has said on this topic has been false, most notably, of course, the claim that he won the 2020 election when, of course, he did not. Because of this, there is an argument that it's irresponsible to air the president's speech tonight. But this speech will be made, it will be news, and it's our job to cover the news.
That is not what a MAGA network kissing up to Trump and his administration would say. In preparing this show and the newsletters for you, I see very critical stuff about Trump and his administration on CBS and in Free Press stories all the time. What happened last week should serve as another nail in the coffin of the myth that CBS is somehow being controlled by the Trump administration. That makes no sense. As I record this, plans are still underway for the same management to potentially take over CNN. I will cover that if and when it actually happens. Meanwhile, another big media issue came to light in Trump's speech, and that involves China and the idea that China tried to swing the 2020 election. So much of what Trump alleged was a jumble of talking points and out of context quotes from some documents released by the CIA. It's not even clear whether Trump knows exactly what he's alleging. China, of course, denies that it did anything to try to swing the 2020 election. U.S. intelligence has said that China considered taking certain actions, but ended up deciding to not take at least some of them. But China definitely has run influence campaigns in general to try to swing public opinion in America. Here is part of what Trump alleged in his speech.
The Chinese government sought to identify U.S. journalists who had reported negatively on the U.S. president and pay them large sums of money to write more negative articles about him, as many as they could, and they didn't care what they said.
That allegation is in a newly released CIA note. There's this document released by the CIA that's partially redacted. I will include it in the newsletter if you want to see it yourself, saying that China sought to identify journalists for that kind of thing. It does not say China succeeded or ended up finding anyone for that. Some analysts have pointed out that these remarks refer to stuff that might not even have been verified. But that doesn't mean that the media is totally free of Chinese influence. This is where news consumers are being left in the dark. Much of the media has carried water for China in some big ways. You might recall that a few episodes ago, I interviewed Salih Hudayar, a global leader of the Uyghurs, the people of East Turkestan. He explained accurately how China gets the world to ignore what it's doing. It uses its massive economic muscle to get people to turn a blind eye to some of its worst actions. It also taps into the world's desire to hate Jews, hate Israel. So it pushes all this anti Israel stuff, which helps distract from its own actions. China is funding left wing movements. So all that is happening. As part of it, China has definitely paid influencers and brought influencers over to China for propaganda trips. And these influencers then say and do whatever China wants. Some people might think of those influencers as citizen journalists. That is a blurry line. I did an episode about that too. What about journalists in news organizations? And what about news organizations themselves? Here is something Salih told me.
The Chinese government, it spends billions of dollars annually buying ads from many of these major media organizations. They'll be like, in exchange for that, you're not going to write anything critical, especially on this issue. You're not going to even touch this issue. That's why you don't hear about our issue anymore. Between like 2017 to about 2020, our issue, made some headlines. But after that, it all died out because this is what China has been doing. It's been buying a lot of influence.
Let's break this down. Has China spent large sums of money buying ads from major media organizations? Yes, that has been a strategy of Beijing. A group called Freedom House did a write-up about this in 2022. They pointed out that in addition to paid influencers, China has used a bunch of tactics, including paid inserts. China, sometimes to its state-owned news agencies, did these paid sections in leading publications and news agencies. Time, the Los Angeles Times, CNN, Foreign Policy. Freedom House says filings with the Department of Justice showed that across less than 3 years, China paid print and online publications at least $7 million to carry such material. Now, as that was coming to light, some of these outlets stopped those ads, including the New York Times and the Washington Post. So during that period, China was definitely funneling money to these organizations. Did that mean that the organizations were necessarily changing their coverage? Not automatically, no. There is supposed to be something in the news business that used to be referred to as church-state separation. The idea that editorial and the business side should have a strict line of separation so that the editorial side is not influenced by the business side. In the real world, one all too frequently bleeds into the other. You have to be very strict in creating this separation. Very often news agencies fail to do that or, just decide not to cover something because after all, they have this great advertorial partnership. They might not say it out loud or in writing, but they do get swayed or not cover things. That can happen. Freedom House said China has used other methods as well, including cyber attacks on news outlets, cyberbullying of journalists, and it said China retaliated against families of US-based journalists in China. It also said online actors have verbally attacked or trolled ethnic Chinese journalists working for US media, especially women. These activities have inhibited certain reporting and had a notable economic impact on US news outlets, though they continue to carry critical coverage. All right, so that was in 2022. It's not clear how much of that is happening right now. It's possible that China and Iran and Qatar have managed to radicalize so many young people, especially who now work for these news agencies, that they don't even have to do as much heavy lifting to get them to report things certain ways anymore. You can see that with New York City and how major news outlets failed to even point out that Mayor Zohran Mamdani took part in a celebration with Chinese officials while refusing to take part in an Israel Day celebration. It is very possible that this is the first time you have heard some or all of this about what China's been up to, and that is significant in and of itself. The news media has failed to make clear the myriad ways China does manipulate the world, manipulate America specifically, and manipulate the media. That then leaves room for Trump to come along and make allegations. People don't know what to believe because they don't have trustworthy sources of truth. For one whole night, big media said, "Look at us, we're not carrying these lies live, at least not without calling them out." It was a droplet of truth in a desert full of people searching for water. Speaking of that, let's have a drink together. I'm doing Zoom dates with supporters at Buy Me a Coffee, buymeacoffee.com/Josh Lebs. It doesn't have to be coffee. We can have something purely hydrating together. Coming up, 350,000 Haitians officially lose their legal right to be in the United States this week. Here's the actual reason why. But first, why the news ignores most groups doing crucial work. There are fantastic nonprofits and other organizations doing important, impactful work to make our society better. Virtually all of them get no attention from the media. News giants reflexively turn to big global NGOs that say things in keeping with the news agency's agendas and push propaganda. But the news straight up ignores virtually all other groups. And in the attention economy, these groups need people to know about them. That's what it takes for them to survive. So it makes sense that some of these awesome organizations partner with me in a specific way. They say, we just want people to sign up for our free emails so they can see what we do. Or we just want people to add their names to a petition calling for truth or justice. That's it. No money, no time commitment, literally just these tiny steps that help show they exist. I don't say yes to every offer. I say yes to the ones you should know about. Here's how it works. In the show notes and newsletter, there are a couple of links for you. Each person who uses my link helps fund They Stand Corrected. It is a totally free, safe way that you can make this work possible. So it's a double good deed. Every time someone does that, I see that it happened. I don't see who, I just see that it happened. It shows me that you are out there, you're listening, you're responding. I feel gratitude. Please check out the links now in the show notes or newsletter. Oh, and I'm now going to start sharing them at this Facebook page that I haven't been using much, but I probably should. It's fb.com/Lebs. Thanks. A big part of what media failure does to our society is it prevents people from knowing what's true. That is what happens when people don't have trustworthy sources. So I often hear from listeners asking me what's true about things they're hearing. I always look first at notes from paid subscribers to the newsletter. I want to honor you all for your support, and everyone has a choice of whether or not to have their names used on the show. One wrote me about a big story that's in play this week. 350,000 people from Haiti are about to lose their legal status here. This listener wrote, the Supreme Court gave permission for Haitians to be deported if they were here for temporary sanctuary. I do not understand the situation. Some say it is racist, others say it is not. When people lie about everything, facts don't enter the equation. She's right. She asked me to tackle this. There has been some reporting on this, but in general, the media has failed to make clear what's going on and why. Here is a clip from one report.
Huge news from the Supreme Court in Washington, with the justices splitting along ideological lines, siding with the White House in some major legal disputes over President Trump's hardline immigration policies. That includes allowing the administration to remove those TPS deportation protections for thousands of Syrian and Haitian immigrants.
That's NBC. They brought in a legal affairs reporter.
What they ruled, the Supreme Court, along ideological lines, was that on non-constitutional claims, federal judges actually can't touch those issues. If it is constitutional, which is what the Haitian case was, saying there was racial discrimination, they say that it's not actually an issue. They rejected that idea entirely.
Okay, that sounds more confusing than it is. I'll talk you through this because this is a big story that speaks to how America is being reshaped in some big ways. You heard an acronym in there, TPS. That stands for Temporary Protected Status. There is a law from 1990 establishing how this works. People fleeing certain situations can get temporary protected status here in the United States. And when that is given, it always has an expiration date. Haiti had a horrible earthquake in 2010. Actually, I did a lot of coverage on that at the time. I was needed at headquarters to anchor this other thing also. So I did a lot of coverage by speaking with people who were trying to reach out to their loved ones. In some cases, who were trapped under the rubble. Anyway, people from Haiti were given that temporary status at the time. Since then, Haiti has been ravaged by corruption and gang warfare and other natural disasters. So, several times along the way, presidents have renewed the TPS order, allowing them to stay longer. Now, it has come up for renewal again, and Trump did not renew it. Trump has been letting basically all TPS orders expire. Ukrainians have one coming up this fall. So do Lebanese people, because this administration did not meet a deadline earlier this year to officially make the announcement about Lebanon. So it just got pushed off to this fall. But the administration is expected to let that one expire as well. Okay, so the original law that got this whole thing set up specifically said that judges don't get to weigh in every time a president makes a decision like this, that it's not subject to judicial review, that it is clearly within the authority of the executive branch of our government. So, how did this case involving Haitians end up at the Supreme Court? Well, anything can go into the court system if there is a constitutional question. If an act, a law, or something the government does might somehow violate the Constitution, people can ask the court to weigh in on that. That's what happened here. People representing these Haitians made a constitutional argument. They said that the Trump administration letting this temporary order expire for these Haitian people was a violation of the Fifth Amendment. How could that be? In the amendment, there is a clause that you hear referred to often. It says that no person shall, quote, be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Okay, that's why you hear due process often. For more than a century, U.S. courts have said that that applies to non-citizens also, basically to everyone in the country. Now, how could letting this TPS expire deprive Haitians of due process? Their lawyers argued that Trump's decision was based on racism, that it was based on racial and anti-Black immigrant bias. And they pointed to some remarks Trump has made in the past, including in his first term when he referred to quote-unquote shithole countries. The problem with that argument, though, is that Trump is letting all the TPS rulings expire. There's no separate action here singling out one country or one part of the world. He's been letting them expire for South America, Asia. He's expected to let Ukraine's TPS expire. So, attorneys for the administration were able to argue that any general remarks he made in the past don't make this racist when it's the same for everybody. And given that the law says courts cannot weigh in on individual decisions, they just don't have the authority to overturn it. All right, the liberal justices disagreed. Something else happened in this case as well, and that is Justice Clarence Thomas wrote his own separate opinion saying that the Fifth Amendment shouldn't even apply to non-citizens. All right, amid all this, there was also a similar fight for several thousand Syrian immigrants, and those two cases got wrapped together before the Supreme Court. In that case, attorneys made a different central argument. They said that the government was violating due process by ignoring its own information about current conditions in Syria. They said the law requires the administration to review conditions, which it does, and determine whether the conditions for TPS hold. But the conservative justices said the law establishes that judges don't get to weigh in on every decision and that there was no proof of a constitutional violation here. The deadline just passed for Syrians. It also just passed for people from Burma, Ethiopia, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. For those 350,000 Haitians, it's this week. Now, it's not as simple as folks have to be gone from the country on that day. Some manage to find other ways to stay legally, like applying for asylum and sometimes getting it. They become subject to removal, but there can be a backlog in processing them through the court system. That can take years. They lose the right to work on TPS, though. They can try to get other ways to work legally, but it's a struggle, and employers have to look into that stuff as well. Okay, so all that is brought to you by this paid subscriber who wanted me to tackle that topic. Here is another one. Regina Guggenheim wrote, "First, thank you for such an incredible podcast." Oh, thank you, Regina. She says, "I heard about Turkey placing Arab settlers, including some Palestinians, into Kurdish territory in northern Syria that they invaded." That sounds confusing, I know, but it doesn't have to be. Here's the deal. This thing that Regina just referred to is a really important issue that the news has ignored. There is a new report from two legal scholars about it. It was published by Emory International Law Review from Emory University, which is actually right near where I live. These two legal experts wrote that this situation is, quote, "perhaps the most aggressive movement of settler populations into occupied territory in current times." All right, so that's how big it is, what Regina is asking about here. Legal scholars calling it the biggest movement of settlers into occupied territories in our time, but there's virtually no coverage. That is what I've been telling you about. There's so much that the news ignores. In fact, this question harkens back to episode 1 of this podcast, the false term, the occupied territories. It's insane. It makes no sense in reference to Gaza and Judea and Samaria. It's just not an accurate term. Back in 2012, a Hamas official acknowledged that Gaza was not occupied. Anyway, here is the topic that Regina brought up. The Kurds have been important U.S. allies, including and especially in the war against ISIS and other Islamist terrorist groups that are trying to take over the world. Kurds are predominantly Sunni Muslims who support secular government and democracy. So all the Islamist groups and Islamist governments hate them. In 2018, Turkey, along with Syrian rebel groups, went and overtook an area called Afrin, a Kurdish enclave in northwestern Syria. This was a straight-up military takeover, which Turkey and these other groups tragicomically called Operation Olive Branch. Okay, that occupation, of course, triggered a humanitarian crisis. Hundreds of thousands of Kurds had to flee. Turkey, meanwhile, and its proxies looted these homes and moved lots of people in. They moved in Arabs, including lots of people who the media would refer to as Palestinians, people who identify with or are identified by the media with the Palestinian movement. If the news was doing its job, you would have heard all about this. The news would have told you the facts that Palestinians, as the news defines that term, overtook this area, stole people's homes, took part in this occupation, colonization, etc. A bunch of Palestinian groups supported this occupation, which, reminder, should not be shocking. Palestinian groups are pro-occupation. Hamas was a big supporter of Syria's longtime occupation of Lebanon. More recently, things changed in Syria. The new group that took over the country has kind of tried to improve relations with the West, with the United States, and with other parts of the world. this group agreed to go about the process of dismantling some of these settlements. And now some Palestinian leaders, seeing the writing on the wall, are saying, oh, well, we never really supported that in the first place. But many are still there in the stolen homes. These are actual settlers in an actual occupation. Unfortunately, virtually no one in the news business cares. Sometimes correcting the media means explaining what they get wrong. Sometimes it means covering what they don't cover, like this. And sometimes it means showing that the same entity can be right on one count, even as it's very, very wrong on another. That's coming up. Just a very quick break here to tell you this is episode 118. That is a very special number, and it is reflected in the newsletter. Check out the founding member rate and all the things you get for being a founding member. 118, super special number, which makes today a great day for you to become a founding member. I'll see you at the newsletter. The New York Times has run another propaganda column from a Brown University professor named Omer Bartov. Last year, when he pushed the genocide blood libel against Israel, I simply looked at what he wrote and fact-checked it. It was very clearly packed with lies. That's not an opinion or theory or accusation. It's a fact. I broke that down for you in episode 67, Truth Aside. This latest piece is more of the same. The Times is a propaganda agency with its op-ed team leading the charge. I know that's hard to accept for people who still have these old ideas of the New York Times, but it is not what it once was. If you are a subscriber there, stop giving them your hard-earned money. In the newsletter, I show my paid subscribers how to access virtually any major news agency, including the Times, for free, legally, with no paywalls. The Times won't shape up and stop this madness until people cancel subscriptions in large enough numbers. Meanwhile, I told you last week how the Trump administration subpoenaed writers at the New York Times in an effort to get them to say who their anonymous sources were for a story involving the security of the new Air Force One. Since then, we have learned that the DOJ apparently also sought phone records from some Times staff and their family members. Preventing this is important for protecting the rights of a free press, no matter how awful any specific site might be. Key questions in this case were pushed off to a new court hearing this week. I'll keep an eye on that for you. I'll update you in the newsletter and in the next episode. Also, there are apparently going to be more modifications made to make sure that the Qatari donated airplane that Trump wants to use for Air Force One will be more secure. For now, send your questions, links, tell me anything you think I got wrong, and I could do an I stand corrected. There are two great ways to be in touch, the newsletter and a form at my website. Both those systems work so well because they prevent spammers and haters from getting through. And I see your messages. Before you go, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review. That is how the algorithms are triggered to encourage other people to listen. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.